Hi and welcome back to another episode of the Canary Room. It's episode 6 of season 2. It's been a slog. It's early July. Coming up on the show today, we'll go around the room, we'll meet some more new inhabitants. It's fair to say it's been a good year this year. We're back on the road again, back down to the Midlands to catch up with the family Kendall. Although we don't see them, we see plenty of their birds on the show. We've got the Redpole diaries. What would life be without those little birds? Probably a damn sight easier. I may have some hair, who knows. We'll go around the room. We've got the return of all of your favourite features, the Canary Room flashback, and we'll finish, as always, the show with question time. As always, sit back and enjoy the show. It's been a while since we've been in the Canary Room. Unfortunately, I've been a little bit under the weather. I'm pleased to say, though, the birds don't seem to have suffered. So we've spent an awful lot of time, it seems, in this little corner of the Canary Room, looking at cage 11, looking at cage 12. And they've been, it's a mother and daughter, they've been fantastic parents, touch wood, so far. They have got young in the nest. They've hatched out this weekend, along with some in cage 15. You'll recall that's the self-green buff hen. 3-year-old self-green buff hen that we'd had some real challenges with in year 1 and year 2, but I'm pleased to say we've got 3 chicks out of her so far, and there's another 2 in the nest. Have jiggled things around a little bit with the nest, so in here we've put a different cock in this time round in cage 12. That's the variegated yellow cinnamon carrying cock. There is a pink eye, it's not in that cage though. It's in cage 11. There's a couple of young in the nest here. Actually, neither of them are the birds that's feeding them. One of hers is in cage 15. And you may wonder why I'm sort of throwing things around, why I'm moving birds around. Well, it's very, very simple. I had 2 dark buff hens that I wanted to ensure that I got as many young out of as possible. So I had 4 hens laying all at the same time. I set them under 3 nests with parents that I felt were reliable. 1 dark has hatched out in here. We'll have a little look at that in a moment. 1 has hatched out in cage 11 and 1 has hatched out in cage 15. So as things stand, there's 2 young from the dark buff hen in cage 15. And there's another young in this cage here from another buff hen. Now that'll be the first chick that we've got out of her. Something that I will do relatively frequently, particularly towards the end of the season when there's specific birds that I'd like to get young from. We'll have a closer look now at, I'll pull some of the nests out and we'll have a closer look now and see some of the latest arrivals. This is the first of the pans that we've got. This is out of cage 12, which is the clear, or the cheek mark buff hen, and the cinnamon carrion variegated cock. You can see there's a dark here, which isn't theirs. There is 2 others, which are their young. Both look to be variegated. There's no pink eyes there. And you'll see that there's 3 eggs that haven't hatched as well. We have had some phenomenally high temperatures, and there's been a number of dead in shell. So there's some chicks. We'll just pull the other thing, the other pan out now, and we'll have a look at the other 2 nests very quickly. This is the pan in cage 11. You can see there's just 2 chicks in here, and again a couple of eggs that haven't hatched. Here's a dark, and here is a little cinnamon. Worryingly, they have been fed, these birds. I've seen them being fed just before we started filming. I need to keep an eye on them. I've got a sense that this hen has probably had enough. There are flight feathers on the bottom of the cage floor, so one of the birds in there, either the cock or the hen, is going into a moult. I may have to move these young around, but we'll find out more about that on the next episode. 1 more nest to check, and then we'll have a look at some of the young that we've taken away since last we were here. So this is the last nest to check in. You can see there's a little dark here, and a little variegated. The variegateds are actually out of cage 11, and the dark is this here. There's 2 here in this nest. and an egg that hasn't hatched. So we've found that with the heat that we've had a lot of dead in shell, or certainly more than we had in the early rounds. But as I say, it's early July now. There is one more nest due, which will hatch in about a week's time, and that's pretty much it with the Fifes for this year. So just behind me here, and this finish off this first section before we go on the road, you can see well, lots of little chicks on the stick. So in here there's 4 chicks from 4 different nests. 2 or 3 were raised together, the Norwich, which is on the spars there, and then 2 of the other young there. The dark is actually from cage 15. Little bird at the back there, which I think is going to be a cock, is out of the Irish hen that we bought in. Behind me here, very, very pleased to get this nest. They're all 3 nest mates. You'll notice I haven't rung any of the birds yet. Now, a little bit more about that in a second. 3 nest mates here, as I say, they're out of the heavily variegated yellow cock and a heavily variegated buff hen that we bought in this year. I like the look of those birds. And then just behind me, again, there's 2 nests in there. There's 2 different nests. There's 4 birds in total. There's a cinnamon, a variegated cinnamon, which has got to be a hen because of the way it's bred. And then there's a self and what looks like a heavily variegated buff. Now, they are out of the best pair I class in the shed, those 2 dark birds. They're the only young I've got out of the pair for this year. I bred 2 out of them last year. I've bred 2 again this year. I think there's real quality in those birds. The reason they haven't been young yet, well, these birds were very, very late being taken away. So remember, in previous episodes I talked about ensuring that your birds were feeding themselves before you take them away. These birds took an absolute eternity. I wasn't 100% sure I was going to get them all. So far, touch wood, I have. I haven't lost any at this stage. It's getting to that time of the season now, you know, hens being a little bit lazier as it gets towards the end of the season. Don't forget the birds were, you know, in breeding condition really at the end of February. So with July now, that's a long time, not just for them, but for me as well. So I wasn't certain that we were going to get them. Pleased to say we have. We've got still young in the nest. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll keep an eye on them, that they'll come through as well. So that's some of our young. We're about to go on the road to the family Kendall, where we'll meet some of theirs. So the first couple of shots we've got are the, well, one end to the other of the expanse that is the A&S Kendall bird room. A phenomenal setup, it really, really is. You can see this is to the left of it, and then you can see to the right there are 4 rows high. God alone knows how many cages there are in there, but a stunning setup. They've got a block of flights as well, which we saw the last time that we were there. First shot of the birds, well, actually it's an Isabel greenfinch being fed by a fife. So they do very well with the greenies, although Adam was telling me when I was down there that they haven't done as well this year in terms of volume terms, but they were pleased with the quality that were coming out. No finer sight than a nest of young, and here I think there's half a dozen in this nest. You just see Adam's finger in there. We move on. It was a whistle stop. There's so much to see in the A&S Kendall partnership that I was trying to capture everything on film. We've got now a nest of young, probably just about ready to be weaned. They're all away. They're not quite feeding themselves, but I don't think they'll be a million miles away. Some nice greens there. So we're variegated on the nest here. The eagle-eyed amongst you will know that this is the best champion and best in show at North of England, and best champion at North Wales, just being fed there. Couple of mules, greeny mules here, which was nice to see. We've got a couple of birds in cages now, a couple of lightly marked birds, a buff on the left and a yellow on the right. Yellow really caught my eye. The buff's got a nice shape as well. but two very nice birds. I imagine once they finish the molt, they'll do very well for the partnership. This is a kind of now you see it, now you don't. So you can see this nest pan is got young in it, and it's got quite a lot of fouling around the edges, and very quickly, as if by magic, trick of the camera, and it's clean. So it's a clean nest pan, and that's one of the things they do there. They do keep on top of their cleaning. They wean their young in flights, which I thought was an interesting approach. I wean mine in individual cages. There's a mixed bag in here of Norwich, of Fifes, of various different young birds, so nice to see them. Some more birds now to have a closer look at. As I said, it's a whistle-stop tour of the shed. I like this variegated, nice bird, lovely position on it, lovely free neck, nice and small, nice size bird, very, very elegant, lovely dark cap on it, and almost the opposite in colour mark terms anyway. Again, another nice variegated bird. Very interested to see how these ones turn up as the season finishes, of course, with the molt, which we'll talk about a little bit later on today's show. Couple more from Adam's darker line to look at now, a heavily variegated here. Lovely, lovely shape on both of these birds, two heavily variegated. Really, really, really nice shape on them, moving across the perches. A long way to go for both of the birds, but I think you get a sense, and you certainly will in the films that you've seen today, of the depth and strength of the team that they're going to be able to put on the show bench this year. Some absolutely lovely birds. I hope to be able to compete with them as the season progresses. We'll see how we both get on the show bench. A couple of quickies now of their crossbills, some young crossbills that they bred. Very, very nice birds, but very, very moving. There's a greenie in there as well, so you can see that they're moving around. A couple of greenies in there, there's moving around. And we finish with some of their cinnamons, and we'll see some of my cinnamons a little bit later in the show today, but they've got a couple of cinnamons here. And then the final clip is a couple of dark birds, a couple more dark birds. It was, phenomenally good trip. Always very, very good bird keepers. Always lovely to see them, always lovely to catch up, and always nice to see the quality of birds at different stages of the season. Hope you enjoyed our little trip to A&S Kendall. There'll be more on the road, I'm sure, in the next episode of the Canary Room. A new addition to the Canary Room in 2017. They came in with a very, very very clear purpose for me, which was to help with the British as foster parents. However, every canary in the room I'd like to try and breed. I've never bred Razzers before. We got a couple in the first round. We had 3. We lost one in the really, really hot weather. There's 4 in the nest that we'll see in a minute as well. So we'll end up with half a dozen Razzers, which will allow me to just move them on and replace them for next year. Dainty little birds, and very, very attractive in their own way. They're not typey like a Fife, but really, really nice. I think this is going to be a yellow. I think we can see it's going to be a yellow. A real sort of, midway through the molt, I'd suggest this bird is. But something actually really, really nice. They're more than likely to stay next year. I've got, we'll talk a little bit later in the show about, what plans we have for the Canary Room moving forward. And maybe actually the viewers can help me with that, but more of that later on. So this week's bird of the week is this delightful little Razzer. We've got a pair of the Razzers behind me. There is another hen in the other side of the Canary Room. There's 4 young Razzers in the nest here that they seem to be feeding quite nicely. To say it's the end of July now, as I say, it's the beginning of July now. There are birds that are still keen to go to nest. There's a couple of hens in cage 9 and in cage 14 that are still in their cages. Their young have been moved, and I will move them at some stage. The Reds have built up on the floor, the Norwich have built up again. but it's really just time to wrap up. More of that a little bit later on. So 4 young in the Razor nest there. So with all a little bit of luck, we'll end up with half a dozen Razor young this year. So we won't keep all of them, we'll keep some of them, we'll look to keep the best, and then we'll move the rest on, and they'll have paid for the seed that they consume. What I really wanted to focus on in this section of the show though is the hen in cage 8. Now as we know, she's a white, she's got a little mark on the back of her. We ran her with a clear yellow cock, and I've never, in all my years, 30 odd years of keeping canaries, I've never come across this before with fifes. So we've had 5 young out of her. There's 2 in the nest now, and there's 3 that are away that we'll see in a moment. And they're all white. Now, I'm not sure what the probability of that is, that all of them would be white. There is something called dominant white, recessive white. I've never known it in fifes, but every single one of her young is white ground. Fabulous for me. It means if the 2 that are in the nest survive, and I hope they will, then we'll have 5 white for next year. But absolutely fascinated by it, absolutely fascinated. Please, if you've got any thoughts on it, contact the show, info@thecanaryroom.tv. I'd love to hear from you. I've never come across it before. As I say, every single one of her young is white. She was with a clear yellow cockbird. There's no white in any of his parentage. So it's an absolute mystery. Let's have a look at the birds in the nest, and then we'll have a look at the 3 whites from her first round. It's one of the oldest birds that we've got in the shed. It was a Norwich that I bred a number of years ago. It's a green ring bird. We first met her in episode 3 of season 1. We bred a white mule out of her, which we met in the last series, and this year we've met a number of her young already. We've got 2 Norwich young that we've bred out of her this year, which we'll see shortly. A bird that I plan to retain. We first met her, she hadn't been colour fed. A bird I plan to retain. I'm not sure whether we'll breed from her again next year or not, whether we'll be lucky enough to, but an absolute stunning specimen, stunning head, fabulous feather quality. Came over from some Irish blood that I brought over 5 or 6 years ago when I first dabbled with the Norwich. Won on the show bench for me. It was best Norwich and in show at the Cheshire Classic. So pedigree, show pedigree and quality. She's bred a couple of nice youngsters for us this year as well. I do love the Norwich, as you know, and we'll see in the Redpole Diaries, which is coming up next, that we've got some goldfinches in the Redpole Diaries, go figure. But we'll see next year, depending on what happens with the goldies. I don't want to just mule with them. I would like to breed some straight goldfinches. But if we get an opportunity over the next few years, then who knows, we may get some muling done with the goldies, and some Norwich will come in very, very useful for that. Beautiful bird, this week's Canary Room flashback. It's time for the Redpole Diaries. It's, as you all know, one of my favourite parts of the show. It's turning into its own little soap opera. The highs and lows, or actually we'd probably just say lows and lows, of keeping these delightful little finches. So the last time we were in the Canary Room, we had eggs in here with the cobalt cinnamon hen, and with the cobalt in the cage behind me. The young actually in the hen behind me here hatched, and we've got some mat cam footage of them now. You can see that around the limb area it's almost like it's been chewed. The hen hatched the first 2 moved off the nest, and then went downhill really rapidly. And I thought I was going to lose her. I bought some hand rearing solution. I moved the young under the reds who were sitting at the time, and they started to feed them, but the redpoles, as you can see from the Matcam footage, were tiny little birds. I figured that if I could get them to about 3 days, we'd stand a fighting chance of getting them. Regrettably, I didn't succeed. I am not giving up. I am absolutely determined. The British birds will come into condition later than the Canaries. The Canaries, as we've said, pretty much finished now for the season. There's one more nest to hatch, but there's just, you know, a few straggling nests. Redpoles are still very much in the throes. I'm going to check them now because I suspect that we might have eggs here. The hen has spent a lot of time, a lot of attention on the nest. I know that our friend, this little hen here, has laid again in the grit pot, so we'll have a look in there. This pair in here have, I think, built a nest. They've certainly been feeding each other. I've not seen them mate. The birds behind me are an absolute mystery. I have seen them mate. We nearly caught them on camera. There's 2 nest sites in there. I've moved things around a little bit in the nest sites for them, but absolutely nothing as yet. But I'll check the internal nest pan now. So let's do some checking of the nest pans. We'll give them some mealworms, and then we'll just have a little look at the goldfinches before we wrap up this section of the show. We can see that the pair here, the pair of normals, have built a nest. There's a nice little nest in there. There's no sign of any eggs yet. So I'll pop this nest back in quickly and hopefully they'll lay over the next couple of days. I do know that there is 2 eggs here, and we'll have a little look in the cobalts in a second to see whether they've laid. And I'll just check in this cage. I'll pop this one back. I'll get the cobalt nest out quickly and we'll see if there's an egg in there. So we can see, and we'll have a close-up look at it in a second, that the cobalt has laid, which is great news. There's 1 egg there, so she's obviously started the laying process. She's still picking up. I said before at the beginning of this section of the show that the redpoles were like a soap opera. Well, let me tell you how much of a soap opera they're like. The cock redpole here, the cock cobalt redpole, broke out of this cage and into the cage below. Now, it's happened twice. The first time it happened, I couldn't quite believe my eyes, and I thought he must have escaped and I've caught him up and put him back in the wrong cage, but I don't remember him escaping. I've wired the cages up now completely, so he shouldn't be able to escape, but I've seen him calling to the hen below, so he's obviously taken a fancy for her. I came in, I think it was one Tuesday, and there were 2 cocks in this cage, and the hen was flying around the canary room. So little characters, absolute sweethearts. Have a little look at this egg. I'll check the other nest. We'll give them some mealworms, and then we'll have a look at the goldies, and hopefully before the end of the year we'll get some redpoles on the sticks. So it remains a mystery for me, this pair of redpoles here. They bred for me last year, didn't rear any to adulthood. I got 1 to 18 days, which is the furthest ever so far, but I'm not going up with them. I'm going to give them some mealworms now. We'll also give the goldies some. With the goldfinches, I've pulled the divider out. It's a 7-foot flight, and there's a trio in there, so there's 2 hens and 1 cock and a couple of nest sites. Now, it may well be ill-advised. We're in July now. I don't anticipate, to be honest, that I'll get a round out of them this year. I figured that I'd give it a go by extending the flight, getting extra exercise on them. They've had plenty of mealworms, frequent baths as well. There is some activity around the nest site, but I'm not sure yet whether they'll do anything this year. Before we feed the mealworms, and perhaps your viewers could help on this one, we're looking at the configuration of the canary room. We know on the wall where we shoot the bird of the week that we've got some of the storage facilities there. In the past we have had flight cages there. There's an L shape really, so if you want to send your designs into the show, I'm thinking about putting another flight in there, and some more weaning cages as well. Predominantly I'm thinking for the British. So if you want to send any designs in, any ideas in at all, info@thecanaryroom.tv, and let's see if between us we can't work it out. Next time on the show we'll have some plans hopefully to look at and discuss. So these are Dan the cameraman's favourite. Let's feed them now, and nothing nicer than to watch the goldfinches and the redpoles devouring them. So that was the Redpole diaries. We'll see what happens with those little beautiful finches over the course of the next few weeks. It's time for the Canary Room top tips, and this week the tip is how to prepare the birds and how to get the birds through a quick molt. So the molt is the annual replacement of feathers. With the reds, which we'll see in a moment, it's very obvious when those birds are going through the molt, because as we're colour feeding them, you can see the new adult plumage coming through, and it's a different colour, it's red. And the same will happen when we colour feed the Norwich later on, and also when we colour feed the Redpoles. With the Fifes, which we don't colour feed, and the Razzers, which we don't colour feed, there's a number of different terms and terminologies that are used. So the first one is the break, and you'll see what that means, and we'll see a couple of birds. I'll pick a couple of birds out in a moment, and you can see where they've broken effectively, and that means that they've had their nest feather and they're starting to develop their adult plumage. What they go like is a burst mattress almost, so they get a lot of white fluffy down on them. One of the ways to tell a bird through the molt is, particularly it's easier to do in the lighter birds, is it'll get a depth of colour, a greater depth of colour as it gets its adult plumage. It can be a stressful time for the birds, so a couple of things to say. Wouldn't be keen on moving them. Certainly I'd never buy a bird that was in the molt or through the molt, and I certainly wouldn't sell a bird that was in the molt. You'll hear the terminology flighted and unflighted. So what that means in canary terms is that a flighted bird is a bird that's over 12 months old. So it's a bird that's had effectively 2 molts. So it's had its first molt where it doesn't shed its tail feather and it doesn't shed its flight feathers, and so that's an unflighted bird. A flighted bird is a bird that has shed its tail feather and has shed its wing feathers. Now you can see if we look around the cages, some of the birds that have got young in the nest have started to drop feathers. That's never a great time. So first tip, don't move them. Keep them in the cages they are. Molt is brought on as a natural instinct when the birds reach a certain age. It's also brought on by a change in light. So round about August, so it's still a little bit early for me while I've got young in the nest, I will change the lighting and I'll move the lighting down to its winter timings. So it'll only be on for a certain hour of day. First things first, you don't move them. Secondly, plenty of oyster shell grit. And if you can, calcium. Great to add in the water during the molt. If you think calcium will help the feather development, it's just a good addition. Anything that you can put in the water, multivitamins, anything like that throughout the molt helps the birds. Next thing, egg food. So we make it up, gosh, we've made it up in cement mixers almost this year with the volume of young that we've bred in the canary room. So egg food, I wouldn't give it every day in the molt. I will give it 2-3 times a week, Reason I don't get it every day is you don't want to get fat on the birds, but the egg food has got lots of vitamins and minerals and sources in there. One of the final tips really for the molt is you want it as quick as possible, so you don't want your birds stuck in a molt, is baths. Plenty of baths, frequent bathing. The birds will naturally preen, that will help them develop. So we've outlined a couple of things there. Let's have a look at them throughout the canary room now. We'll start off by having a look at the reds, and you can see how their annual replacement of feathers is coming on. So we talked as well about birds in the break. You can see the birds here. What I mean, the feathers down the flank and just on the back, credibly, like a burst mattress. That bird's starting to break. And what you can see as well in this bird is that there's a depth of colour starting to come through it. So that bird is into the molt. It's got a long way to go yet. Molt the body first and then finish with the heads. And the last bit, generally speaking, is around the eyes. We mentioned about flighted and unflighted birds. These birds here, which are parents this year, were unflighted. Next year, they'll be flighted. You can see the cock's tail is starting to drop. You'll notice that around the cage, there's little bits of body feather. And we'll zoom in and you'll see that there's flight feathers and tail feathers as well. Now, it's a challenge for these birds because they've still got young in the nest, which we may have to move. So you'll see that the birds will actually drop an entire tail at times. The tail will go very thin. They'll never drop all their wings at the same time, but they'll replace feathers individually. We zoom in, we can see the feathers on the bottom of the cage. So this is just a drinker full of mineralised grit. Make sure this is available all the time through the molt. Really important. Helps aid the bird's digestion, but it's an oyster shell grit as well, so it's got calcium in it. So I'm going to pop that in. Then we'll give them egg food, and then the final tip for the molt, successful molting, is popping the baths on. So we'll do that. So we've got our prepared egg food now, just in finger drawers. And we pop that on just 2 to 3 times a week during the molt period. As I say, you don't want to give it every day because it'll put additional weight on the birds, and you can do without that for the show season. So the egg food's on, and the final thing that we do, and do this as often as you possibly can, is baths. Birds absolutely love to bathe. Birds that don't bathe, it can be a sign that they're not 100%. If I could have baths on every day in here, I would. Certainly during the molt, 3-4 times a week. Can put a tiny little bit of either Johnson's baby shampoo in there, little tiny bit of tea tree oil. Tea tree will help clear if there's any nasties living on the birds, it'll help clear them off. So I'll just feed the cage behind me and then we'll go and put the baths on. One final tip, offer baths. When you can't offer baths, just give them a spray. That will help them preen, and that's what you want to do. You want to get the natural oils of preening going, and that will help finish them off. And that's this week's top tips on how to get your birds successfully through the molt. So far, it's been a really good year in the canary room this year. We've bred a number of birds, just the redpoles to come, fingers crossed. Regular subscribers to the show will know all about the cinnamon challenge that I've set myself. So as a champion exhibitor of 5 fancy canaries, I have won every single colour special in the champion section, with the exception of cinnamon. Cinnamon, I have had second best cinnamon in show, but never best cinnamon. We'll know this year that we brought in a cinnamon carrion buff cock. We had 2 cinnamon yellow hens who've yielded some young for us. We've got 2 in the nest with the self cinnamon, and there's a cinnamon in there, a variegated cinnamon. And we've had a mixed bag of success with the cinnamons so far this year. So we've got a visually clear cinnamon, which would be shown if it makes the show team in the clear class, although it is a cinnamon. We've got a variegated cinnamon just behind Dan in the training cages, which has been scalped, I think it's fair to say, by its mother. There's a cinnamon in the nest, and then there's a very, very young cinnamon that we saw earlier in cage 11. So we won't count the 2 that are in the nest yet, but we've got 3 visual cinnamons on the sticks. We've got 2 of them here to show you. We've got a cinnamon variegated buff hen behind me here, and a heavily variegated cinnamon yellow cock here. Now you can see both birds are a long way to go. Cinnamon yellow cock is probably a little bit more advanced in moult terms than the variegated cinnamon buff hen. Cinnamon buff hen's got nice markings, nice little bird, showing some early signs of potential. Cinnamon yellow cock is a little bit nervous, although when it stands up again, it's a nice bird. I'm looking forward to seeing what the other cinnamon is like out of the nest. One of the earlier birds that I've seen from that pairing is nice, so I like the look of that. Whether our class win and our special will come this year or not, still very, very early to say. But I like the way these birds are taking shape. This has got nice carriage to it, nice back feather. This bird here, again, is a nice bird. So 2 nice birds. A long way to go for both of them yet, as I say. July, first show isn't till October, so an awfully long way for these birds to finish off. But I wanted to take the chance just to show you them, just to show you how they're developing. We may end up with half a dozen cinnamons, of which possibly, if everything comes through okay, 5 will be visually cinnamon. That brings really thoughts to next year about what birds we keep, what birds we don't keep. More of that in later shows. I've had some questions in already on that, in terms of how we work out what birds we retain, and it'll probably be the next top tip on the next edition of the Canary Room. So, a couple of cinnies to take a look at now. Who knows how they'll do, and maybe this year could be our year. Let's hope this year is our year with the cinnamons. We'll see. I'm sure there'll be some lovely ones on the bench. It's time for question time. So the first question, and we've only got time for one today. I suspect we'll have another mammoth episode of the show. It's coming from a good friend of ours, Neil Ellis. Any help or advice, please, Matt? I've had a really challenging year. Couple of chicks and a large proportion of clear eggs. Not had a great season. Any advice, Neil? It's a real challenge. You've got about half a dozen hens, so not a massive number of hens to run with. I think the first thing to say is never give up. If we've learnt nothing from the Canary Room, last season we had a really, really difficult year, and this year we've bounced back. And that just is what canary keeping is like sometimes, and bird keeping is like sometimes. So you can employ the same techniques, you can do the same treatments, you can put everything together the same, and for some reason things just don't click. If anybody's having real difficulties, with the birds. Obviously the season now, certainly in the UK, is pretty much past. I've seen, while we've been filming today, there's a couple of birds that are left together that have mated, but I won't put pan in for them now. It's way too late for that. So, well, what can you do? Well, first and foremost, you need to check the fertility of your cocks. So what I would suggest that you do is you test mate now some of the cock birds to see whether or not they are fertile. Now, if you're running a cock with multiple hens, there's always going to be a chance that he doesn't fill every egg. And that's one of the things that you just got to accept. If I look in the canary room of the 12 fife cocks we've used this year, every one of them has filled eggs. Now, we haven't got young off every one of them. There's 2 of the birds that we've got no young from. They've hatched, but they haven't made it through to full adulthood. Now, that can be 2 reasons. 1, it can be there's a problem with the cock. 2, it's a problem with the hen. So the first tip for you, Neil, is test mate with the cock birds, particularly if it's a bird that you're keen to retain for its visual quality, and understand whether it's fertile. It can, of course, mean that your stud is young and the birds haven't quite reached their sexual maturity. Now, that can depend on when they were bred and were born last year. And as with all livestock, some will be more advanced than others. I would advise, and I've done it here in the canary room, to use pairs as much as possible. I have used a cockbird with 3 hens, the cinnamon carrying yellow cockbird, and his fill rate of eggs is about 75%. So using that technique, I know and understand that not every egg that's laid is going to hatch. I've got other cockbirds that I've used with 1 hen and they've filled every egg, and other cockbirds I've used with 2 hens and they've filled every egg. So it's very much down to the individual cockbird. Again, I've said it so many times over the course of the episodes, understand your birds, work with your birds, get to know them, get to understand their qualities and their faults. But most of all, if you learn nothing from here, persevere, persevere and persevere. And however down you feel, and we've all been there, it can be incredibly frustrating. Never, ever give up. That's all we've got time for today. I hope you've enjoyed the show. As always, you can contact us on email at info@thecanaryroom.tv. Follow us on Facebook and you can contact us through our Facebook page. And don't forget to check out our Instagram posts. Until next time, take care.